I just found out that my wife and my own brother are planning to commit me to a psychiatric hospital so they can manage my money while I recover from a non-existent nervous breakdown. This all started exactly 3 weeks ago, and now, sitting in my car by the curb, I realize I only have a few days left before they sign the papers. My name is Mark, I'm 34, and until this month, I thought I had the perfect life. A successful logistics business, a cozy home in the Seattle suburbs, and a family everyone envied. My wife, Sarah, was always my rock, or so I thought. We've been married for 5 years, and she helped me through the toughest stages of growing the company. My younger brother, David, who is 28, was always a bit irresponsible, but I bailed him out of every debt hole he managed to crawl into. I paid for his tuition, bought him his first car, and even gave him a stake in my business, hoping it would make him grow up. Everything changed on the first Monday of this month. I came home earlier than usual and overheard them talking in the kitchen. They weren't screaming. They were talking very calmly, almost businesslike, discussing my diagnosis. Sarah said I had become unstable and aggressive, even though I haven't raised my voice once in all these years. David kept nodding, saying the business was suffering from my poor decisions, and that temporary guardianship was the only way to save the assets. In that moment, the world went dark. I didn't walk into the room and I didn't start a fight. I just quietly left the house and drove to the office, trying to process the sheer scale of what I just heard. Over the next 10 days, I started noticing strange things. My morning coffee began to have a weird, bitter aftertaste that left me feeling completely drained and drowsy. Sarah started recording our minor household disagreements on her phone, baiting me into an emotional reaction and then cutting the recording as soon as I started defending myself. She was building a case. I started checking the accounts and discovered David had been quietly siphoning off small amounts through shell companies he'd set up behind my back. It wasn't millions, but it was a methodical theft. When I tried to gently ask him about how things were going at the company, he looked at me with such fake pity that I wanted to hit him. He said, "Mark, you haven't been yourself lately. You're forgetting things. Maybe you should take a break? Sarah and I will handle everything." It was a trap. The most terrifying part was that they were working together. In the evenings, they'd sit on the couch, drinking wine and discussing vacation plans as if I were invisible, or like I was some terminally ill old man who didn't understand a thing. I became a prisoner in my own home. Every morning, I pretended to drink that coffee and then poured it down the sink the second Sarah turned her back. I had to keep my mind sharp to see just how far they were willing to go. On day 15, I found a business card for a private attorney specializing in mental competency in Sarah's purse. Next to it was a brochure for a private clinic called Quiet Shores. It's a place for people with severe addictions and mental disorders, where visitation rules are extremely strict. I realized that if I just left, they'd use it against me, claiming I'd gone missing in a state of psychosis. I had to play their game while staying one step ahead. I started secretly documenting their actions. I installed a hidden camera in the office where they liked to conspire and began keeping a diary of every move they made. But the more I learned, the more my hands shook. It turns out their connection has lasted much longer than just this month. Photos on David's phone, which I saw by chance when he left it charging, confirmed my worst fears. They didn't just want my money. They wanted me gone so they could have a future together. Now I'm sitting in my car, looking at our lit-up house, and I know that tomorrow they plan to bring in a doctor for a home evaluation. It'll be a doctor they've paid off, I'm sure of it. I have exactly 48 hours to turn their plan into their own nightmare, but the price I'll have to pay might be too high. I feel everything kind and decent I ever felt for them burning away. All that's left is a cold, calculating rage. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust people again after my closest relatives decided to sell my life for a few $1,000,000 and a house with a view of the bay. Last night, David smiled at me and wished me sweet dreams, knowing that, in his plan, it was one of my last nights of freedom. He even patted me on the shoulder. That hand, which I had shaken so many times in support, was now preparing to push me off a cliff. The next morning, the air in the house felt thick, like I was breathing underwater. I woke up early, making sure Sarah saw me finishing my coffee before I slipped into the bathroom to dump it. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and I had lost nearly 10 pounds in 2 weeks. I looked exactly like the unstable person they wanted the world to see. It was terrifying how easy it was for them to gaslight me. Every time I tried to mention a business meeting or a project, Sarah would gently touch my hand and say, "Mark, honey, we talked about this. You canceled that meeting days ago. Don't you remember?" The conviction in her voice was so strong that, for a split second, I'd actually doubt my own sanity. This was her weapon. A blend of fake concern and calculated lies designed to break my spirit before they even moved me to the clinic. David showed up around noon, acting like the helpful younger brother. He brought over some legal papers, claiming they were just routine operational updates for the logistics firm. I knew better. My hidden camera in the study had caught him the night before, laughing with Sarah as they went through my private safe. David had said, "Once he's in quiet shores, the power of attorney kicks in automatically. We can liquidate the warehouse assets within a month." Sarah had just leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "I just want this over with. I can't keep playing the worried wife forever. It's exhausting." Hearing that was a different kind of pain. A cold, sharp realization that my entire marriage had become a performance she was tired of acting in. She wasn't just a traitor. She was bored of me. I sat at the kitchen table with David, pretending to read the documents. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he could see it through my shirt. I noticed he was wearing a watch I had given him for his birthday last year. A $5,000 piece he definitely couldn't have afforded back then. "You okay, man?" David asked, leaning in. "You're shaking a little." I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Just haven't been sleeping well, Dave. Lots on my mind." He exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Sarah, who was standing by the stove. It was that look, that silent communication between them, that confirmed they were already living a life I wasn't part of. They were a team and I was the obstacle. I spent the afternoon resting in my room, but I was actually on my laptop, which I had encrypted 3 days prior. I discovered that David hadn't just been siphoning money. He had been intentionally sabotaging our contracts to lower the company's valuation. He wanted to make it look like I was running the business into the ground so that the court would have more reason to hand over control to him. He was willing to destroy everything I built just to get a bigger slice of the pie. It wasn't just greed. It was resentment. He hated that he was the little brother who needed help, and this was his way of finally being the one in charge. The tension in the house was reaching a breaking point. Every meal felt like a final supper. Sarah was being overly attentive, constantly asking if I needed water or if the lights were too bright. It was a psychological war. She was trying to make me snap, to give her a reason to call the doctor early. I had to remain a ghost. Quiet, compliant, and observant. I realized then that they weren't just waiting for me to lose it. They were actively setting a stage for a performance tomorrow. The lawyer, the doctor, the worried family members. They had probably invited a few of our friends over under the guise of a supportive intervention. They were going to strip me of my life in front of witnesses, and they were going to do it with a smile. I stayed up late that night, listening to them whisper in the guest room. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard my name and the word sedative. They were planning to drug me if I resisted the evaluation. My own brother and my wife were discussing how to chemically subdue me like an animal. I sat on the floor of my closet, the only place I felt safe, and realized that I couldn't just play defense anymore. If I waited for tomorrow to happen to me, I was finished. I had to make sure that when the doctor arrived, the story they had written was no longer the one being told. But as I looked at the photos of us on the wall, the wedding in Maui, the Christmas at the cabin, I felt a crushing sense of grief. The people I loved never actually existed. They were just masks, and the monsters underneath were finally coming out to play. The morning of the evaluation felt like a funeral I was forced to attend while still breathing. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of Sarah's voice downstairs. Not the soft, melodic tone she used to wake me with, but a sharp, commanding whisper. I stayed at the top of the stairs, hidden by the shadows of the hallway. David was there too. They were standing by the front door, welcoming two men I didn't recognize. One was dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The other was a middle-aged man with a clinical, cold expression who I assumed was the doctor from Quiet Shores. They weren't just here to talk. They were here to process me. I walked down the stairs, making sure to keep my footsteps heavy and my posture slumped. I needed them to think the medication from the coffee was still clouding my brain. When I entered the living room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Sarah rushed over, putting an arm around my waist in a way that looked supportive but felt like a restraint. "Mark, honey, these gentlemen are here to help us," she said, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary concern that made my skin crawl. "We're all just so worried about your recent episodes." I looked at David. He was leaning against the fireplace, a smirk playing on the corners of his mouth. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed anymore. The doctor, a man named Dr. Eris, sat me down and started asking rapid-fire questions about my memory and my paranoia. Every time I tried to answer calmly, Sarah would interrupt with a lie. "He's been seeing things, doctor. Last night he was screaming about cameras in the walls," she said, clutching her pearls. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I never said that, Sarah." David let out a short, mocking laugh. "See? This is what we're talking about. The denial is the worst part." They began to recount instances of my instability that never happened. Stories of me breaking furniture, threatening the staff at work, and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars on gambling. Then came the moment that broke something inside me. I started to explain that I had records of the business accounts, that I could prove David was the one stealing. I felt tears of pure, unadulterated frustration welling up because no matter what I said, they had a counter-narrative ready. When I reached for my phone to show them the encrypted files, David stepped forward and snatched it out of my hand. "You're getting agitated again, Mark. Just calm down," he said. I looked at the three of them, my wife, my brother, and this hired doctor, and I realized they were actually enjoying this. They laughed when I started to cry. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh, but a cruel, muffled snicker. David leaned over to the doctor and whispered, "He always gets like this when he's caught in a lie. It's pathetic, really." Sarah joined in, a small, triumphant giggle escaping her lips as she looked at David. In that moment, the power dynamic was laid bare. They weren't just trying to get the money. They wanted to humiliate me, to strip away my dignity before they threw me in a locked ward. They were mocking my pain, my confusion, and the 5 years of my life I had given to a woman who now thought my total destruction was funny. The doctor nodded, scribbling something on a clipboard. Based on the family's testimony and the patient's clear emotional volatility, I believe an involuntary 72-hour observation period is necessary for his own safety, he said. Sarah sobbed. A perfect, rehearsed performance, and thanked him. David walked over to me, grabbed my arm, and squeezed it hard enough to leave a bruise. "Don't fight it, big brother. It'll only make the intake process harder. We'll take good care of the company while you're getting better." I felt the walls closing in. The betrayal was no longer a secret plan. It was a physical weight crushing the air out of my lungs. I looked at the front door, where 2 orderlies I hadn't seen before were now standing, waiting for the signal. I had played the victim so well that I had almost become one. The realization that they were laughing at my tears was the final spark I needed. I wasn't just losing my house and my money. I was losing my humanity to people who treated my life like a joke. As the orderlies stepped forward, I looked at the clock. It was 10:15 a.m. I had 1 card left to play, and if it didn't work, the door to Quiet Shores would be the last thing I'd see for a very long time. The orderlies moved toward me, their heavy boots thudding on the hardwood floor I had polished myself just last month. Sarah turned away, hiding her face in her hands to simulate a breakdown, but I saw her eyes through her fingers. They were cold, calculating, and completely dry. David gripped my shoulder again, his fingers digging into my muscle. "It's for the best, Mark. Just go quietly," he whispered. I looked at the doctor, who was already packing his briefcase, treating my kidnapping like a finished piece of paperwork. I had been pushed to the edge of the cliff, and they were all waiting for the sound of the fall. "Wait," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I reached into my back pocket. David flinched, probably thinking I was going for a weapon, but I pulled out a small, black remote. "Before you take me anywhere, Sarah, you might want to check the email I just sent to your father. And David, you might want to check the one I sent to the district attorney." The room went dead silent. David laughed, that same mocking, condescending sound from earlier. "Nice try, Mark. You're delusional. You haven't sent anything. You've been under our watch for weeks." I clicked the button on the remote, and the large television in our living room flared to life. It didn't show the morning news. It showed the high-definition feed from the hidden camera in my study from 3 nights ago. The audio was crystal clear. On the screen, Sarah and David were standing over my open safe. Sarah was laughing, holding a stack of my bonds, while David talked about how they had finally perfected the dosage in my coffee to make me look crazy for the evaluation. But that wasn't the twist. The real blow was yet to come. As they watched the screen in stunned silence, the video cut to a recording from last night. It was Sarah on the phone in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. She wasn't talking to David. She was talking to a man named Marcus, my lead accountant and the person I trusted most with the firm's finances. "Don't worry, Marcus," Sarah's voice echoed through the living room. "Once David signs the papers as the temporary guardian, he's going to transfer the bulk of the liquidation funds to the offshore account we set up. David thinks he's getting half, but he's just the fall guy. Once Mark is locked up, I'll frame David for the embezzlement and leave him with nothing. I'm not spending the rest of my life with a loser like him." The color drained from David's face. He turned to Sarah, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and pure horror. The woman he had betrayed his own brother for, the woman he thought was his partner in crime, had been planning to throw him under the bus the entire time. The doctor stepped back, realizing he was caught in the middle of a massive criminal conspiracy. Sarah didn't even try to deny it. She didn't cry or scream. She just looked at David with a terrifying, blank expression and said, "You were always too stupid to see the big picture, David." I stood up, shaking off David's weakened grip. I wasn't the broken man they had spent a month trying to create. "The police are 3 minutes away," I said, checking my watch. "I didn't just record you. I sent the full ledger of David's thefts and the recordings of your conversations to the authorities. But there's one more thing." I looked at Sarah, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. "The money you thought Marcus was moving to your offshore account? Marcus doesn't work for you, Sarah. He's worked for me for 12 years. He told me everything the moment you approached him 3 weeks ago. Every dollar you thought you were stealing is currently being frozen by the bank. You're both broke, and you're both going to prison." The moral dilemma I had struggled with all month, whether to destroy my only family, vanished in that moment. I looked at the orderlies, who were now looking at the doctor for instructions. The doctor looked like he wanted to vanish through the floor. The house felt like a crime scene, which is exactly what it was. But as the sirens began to wail in the distance, a cold realization hit me. I had won, but at what cost? I had spent a month living with monsters, and to beat them, I had to become just as cold as they were. I looked at the wedding photo on the wall and realized that the man in that picture died the moment they laughed at my tears. Now I had to decide, do I let the police take them, or do I give them one last chance to run and live with the hunger and the fear for the rest of their lives? The sirens were deafening now, the blue and red lights strobing against the living room walls like a frantic heartbeat. David was hyperventilating, his back pressed against the fireplace he once stood by so arrogantly. He looked at Sarah, hoping for a spark of the alliance they had built, but she wouldn't even look at him. She was busy scrubbing her face, trying to wipe away the smeared makeup and the remnants of her worried wife persona, preparing her next mask for the officers entering the house. The doctor and the orderlies had already retreated to the porch, hands raised, desperate to distance themselves from the wreckage of the scheme. The front door burst open, and the cold night air rushed in, but it didn't feel as cold as the silence between us. As the officers moved in to cuff David, he started screaming, not at me but at Sarah. He called her every name in the book, his voice cracking with the realization that he had traded his soul for a woman who viewed him as a disposable pawn. Sarah remained eerily silent. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she looked at me one last time. There was no remorse, no apology. Just a sharp, jagged resentment that she had been outplayed. She had never loved me, and she had never loved David. She only loved the lifestyle my labor had provided. "Wait," I said to the lead officer as they began to lead them out. I walked over to David, my little brother, the boy I had protected from bullies, the man whose rent I had paid for years. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but a hollow stranger. I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. I just felt an overwhelming, soul-crushing exhaustion. "I'm not dropping the charges, David," I whispered, "but I'm not going to watch you leave." I turned my back on them and walked into the kitchen, the same place where this nightmare began 30 days ago. I stood by the sink and looked at the coffee maker. It was a simple, everyday object, but to me it was now a monument to a month of psychological torture. I realized then that while I had saved my money and my freedom, I had lost my sense of home. Every corner of this house was tainted by the memory of their whispers, their laughter at my tears, and the way they had looked at me like I was already a corpse. I had spent 30 days fighting to keep a life that I no longer wanted. The money was still in the bank, the company was still mine, but the man who enjoyed those things was gone. A month ago, I thought I knew who I was. Now, I'm a man who knows exactly how much his life is worth to the people he loved most. Turns out, I was worth a house in the suburbs and a few million in assets. That's the price of a brother's loyalty and a wife's devotion. I stayed in that empty house for exactly 1 hour after the police left. I grabbed a single suitcase, my laptop, and the encrypted files that saved me. I didn't pack the photos. I didn't pack the mementos. I left the lights on and the door unlocked. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing in that house was real. As I drove away, heading toward a hotel in a city where nobody knew my name, I realized that the quiet shores they wanted to send me to wasn't a clinic. It was the life I was already living. A quiet, isolated shore where I was the only person left. They say the truth sets you free, but they never tell you how cold that freedom feels. I won the war, I kept the money, and I destroyed my enemies. But as I look at the empty passenger seat, I can't help but wonder if the version of me that believed in family was the one who actually lost. Maybe the real madness isn't believing in conspiracies, but believing that love is something that can't be bought and sold. I'm 34 years old, I'm a millionaire, and I'm completely alone. And for the first time in a month, I don't have to worry about the taste of my coffee. I just have to figure out how to live with the taste of the truth.